Our master of music. Okay. Everybody got a handout, right?
You better save the applause and see how it goes. Yeah, how is everyone today? Good. I wish I had a little table, but I'll make do.
That chair is your table.
Yeah, I'll put my water right here. Just
He uses the chair as a table.
he uses the chair as a table. Oh, I'm gonna be less. Oh. Should I sit in this and use this as the table, or
for your water?
okay? We're showing adaptability. How's everyone this morning? So I served the First Baptist Church of Meridian, Mississippi, from 1988 to 1995. So a Mississippian. Any other Mississippians in the room? You guys know where Meridian is? Between Jackson and Birmingham on Interstate 20. Wonderful church, wonderful people, classy people, Mississippians. The First Baptist Church was an old, distinguished, historic downtown church. And while we were there, it celebrated its 150th anniversary. It's, what's that, sesquicentennial? Yeah, and then that's been almost 30 years ago. So there was a saint of the church named Catherine Bubeck. She stood about this tall. And she always would walk up to you, wherever you saw Catherine, she'd say, "What you know good? What you know good?" And I have never forgotten that. And I thought for just about 2 minutes this morning, I would ask you, what you know good? Tell us something good that's happening. With you?
It rained last night.
It rained last night?
That's what I was going to say.
We went to California.
Did I say it, sweetheart?
Ah, the adventurers are back. How many adventurers got back? Okay, a few.
Sleeping.
Wonderful. Uh-oh, we got some folks who are sleeping
I
in.
think a lot of it. I'm still tired.
I'm tired.
That's understandable.
It was walking and walking.
That's understandable.
And walking.
What you know good? Anyone else?
I got up this morning.
You got up this morning? Yeah. So, I guess you've heard about this. This is not good, but I'll try to move from this to another thing that is. Sadly, you heard about the bombing in Manhattan last night. And yeah, in the Chelsea neighborhood in Manhattan, early reports are that no one was killed, but there are some significant injuries. It may be something like the Boston Marathon device. So, very serious. Very serious, very serious. And I would not dismiss that at all. But we have a son who lives in Brooklyn, New York. And so we're just about to go to bed last night, and Lori is looking at Facebook, and she says, "Oh, have you heard about the bombing?" I said, "What?" And so immediately I pick up my phone and text Christopher, and I got a text right back. He said, "I was just about to text you." Carolyn's in the same situation. Where's Mason in relationship to Chelsea?
He is in Lower Manhattan. But I will tell something good about Mason that relates to music.
Okay.
This is my grandson, who is in his second year in college in New York City, Pace University in Lower Manhattan. I mean, he's blocks from the 9/11 memorial. And on his own, he has joined the choir at Trinity Church.
Oh, yes, I know.
And
Church, yeah.
that he does choir practice. He received a stipend last year, $200 each semester, for singing in the high school, college choir that he could join without audition.
Okay.
He sang in 2 services last Sunday on 9/11.
Wow.
I could go home and find the video and find him in the service.
Wonderful.
Now that's a good thing. And enough happens in New York that my mother always had the philosophy, no news is good news.
Right, right.
And we figure if something happened, we would have heard from him. But one of Carolyn's friends texted him and found out.
That he was okay last night. And so I sent an email to Christopher's grandparents, my parents in Atlanta this morning, and I said, "Christopher is fine. I'll call later this afternoon," you know, so we're grateful for that.
My niece and nephew live in Manhattan as well, but up near Riverside Park, so they weren't close to the bomb, and they texted everyone and said we're fine.
Yeah. Good, good to hear all of that. Well, let's shift gears to our topic du jour. So my title I've given this is How Worship Transforms Us. How Worship Transforms Us. And hopefully you all have a handout. There's a few things I'd like to refer to along the way. Don't cheat quite yet and look ahead. I'm going to just help you resist that temptation just a little bit, because there is one little surprise in this. I could just as easily have posed this as a question. Does worship transform us? And honestly, it's the sort of question I've lived with my entire ministry. I guess I've sort of staked my life and my ministry on the assumption that, yes, it does, but then I continue to live with a question, well, how does it? How does that work? So, in a way, this topic is a little bit out of my story of trying to figure this out. Not that I have figured it out or ever will, but I think it's worthy of a conversation. And I hope that's what we'll have today. So I don't know, my assumption is that Discovery class is a place where we could have a conversation together. Is that a good assumption?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So we're gonna jump in. There's a couple of goals here, so I'll outline the goals. Whether we'll achieve them or not, who God only knows, but we'll see. Goal number one for this topic today is to reflect on how living life attuned to worship through the week and then gathered in community transforms us into those who are recreated in the likeness of Christ. That's a lofty goal, isn't it? Okay, maybe one more time. So goal number one is to reflect on how living life attuned to worship through the week and then gathered in community on Sundays transforms us into those who are recreated in the likeness of Christ. And goal number two is to consider together some disciplines that will shape us to this end. So, on your first page, your cover page, there are three questions we'll come back to sort of toward the end that we'll try to answer. What is worship? How are we formed or informed or transformed in worship to be image bearers, or in other words, to be remade in the likeness of Christ? You know, and we're going to talk a little bit about the image of God idea that's embedded in the creation story. And then, to what end are we transformed? Sort of what I would call the so what question. I think that's an important question to often live with on any topic. You have an erudite intellectual exploration. By the way, I'm all for that. But then, I want to say, so what? To what end? Okay? All right. So, in order to get at this, I want us to very quickly, and boy, this is what I would call a survey of scriptures. I want us to ponder and ask some questions about three scripture passages. And you have those on the second page. If you have your Bible, that's fine, but I wanted us to have the same translation. So we're going to look at three scriptures that I have definitely cherry-picked. I will go ahead and admit it. But I see these scriptures as creation, our response, and recreation. All right? So let's explore these just a little bit together. I'll read, make a comment or two, and ask you a question, ask you to dive in. From the creation story. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created humankind in His image. In the image of God, He created them. Image of God, He created them. So, when the Hebrew Scriptures say humankind is made in the image of God, what does it mean? What think ye?
Well, the first thought is physical image.
Okay. So does God have a corporeal reality?
Probably not. but he was the designer, so I guess.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay, okay. I'll buy that God was a designer. That's interesting. Okay.
I always wonder why it says let us make. Who's us?
What do you think?
I guess it's the Trinity. I don't know.
I think that's always a good answer.
Thank you.
There are two answers you're almost never wrong about in church: Jesus and the Trinity. You know, the Sunday school, especially around Wilshire, you say the Trinity, you're going to be right a lot. Yeah, yeah.
This is the royal we.
Or the royal we. Oh, interesting. This image of God idea? What do you think is meant here?
Well, according to some of Scripture, he's an old man sitting on a throne when people have seen a vision of heaven. And so that presents a problem because you have some people say, oh, he's a spirit. Well, we have a physical body here, and yet when we die, we will have another different type of body so that we can live there. I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see.
Well, now that is an answer, Polly, of humility. You know what? And about a lot of issues on this side of Jordan, that's actually a pretty good approach. We'll just have to wait and see.
And they also talk about the 24 elders that are sitting on thrones around.
Oh my, you have really, you're jumping to the head of the class, Polly. We're going to get to Revelation in just a minute. So somebody was asking me for pictures of our grandsons. We have 2 grandsons under the age of 2 who live in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And so I was so delighted, of course, as some of you are, who maybe have grandchildren or children, when someone said about boy number 1, Elijah, Dad, I think he looks like you a little bit. Oh, don't you know, that warmed my heart. You know, that he, in some genetic way, was sort of made in my image. But even more than the physical resemblance, and I think it's actually modest. Elijah, very early, became the child who did not smile a lot. Actually, he smiles more now. But he seemed to look at you and take it in. And just observe. And he wasn't really going to give you anything back or let you know what thoughts he was pondering. But he would just observe, and then maybe a little shy smile. And then, I think it was Lori, my wife, who said, that's how he's like you, is his focus, his intensity. Oh, well then my heart really did pump up. You know, so whatever this image of God idea is, whatever it is that God has created in us, it maybe in some ways it is all of the above. You know, so I don't know. Well, I want you just to live with that idea. Whatever else is going on, God is creating. God is giving us the gift of creation, and He's put some of that in God's sons and daughters. All right?
I think that the us maybe would refer to Adam, because although God created everything and named everything, he left it up to Adam to name the animals. And so in a way, Adam was, in a sense, a co-creator.
Lovely.
Except for the fact that he wasn't creating the animals, but he was naming them, which to me implies some sort of ownership.
Or a creative impulse.
Yes.
To imagine, now what label shall I place upon this being?
Why, that would have been a tough job.
Yeah. I would also say that God places in us a goodness. There are some Christian theologies that, of course, deal with original sin, and I don't think any of us would, well, even the bombing last night in New York shows that at times the world is broken or bent. But I love the idea that even though that may be true, there is also an original goodness still present in all of God's creatures. And no matter how bent and broken the world is, I think that also is part of the image of God. But we live with the paradox of that, don't we? That both things are true. That there's goodness and evil in all, like the illustration from George's sermon last week about the child who was neither red nor green but striped. Do you remember that? Yeah. Okay. So let's think about a response to all that is, to all that God offers in creation. And look at the Mark passage. One of the scribes came near and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that he answered them well, he asked him, "Which commandment is the first of all?" Jesus answered, "The first is this, Shema Israel, Shema Adonai Elenu Adonai Echad." It's still a phrase used every Sabbath in synagogue. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, with all your mind and with all your strength." The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. So, in what ways is this response, if you think of this as a response to God's original creative goodness, in what way is this response, or our responses, shaped by this, an act of worship? It must be a poorly worded question. It evokes no response.
Well, I think one thing is how we were talking about that it's in His image, so you have this Trinitarian view, and then in this verse you see this Trinitarian thumbprint that's in us of the heart, mind, and soul. And He's saying, with all of the things that I've given you, worship back with that.
Wonderful, wonderful. And to build on that a little bit, Chad, I think the capacity to love is part of the evidence that we are made in the image of God.
Yeah.
That God's fingerprints are upon our existence. Just think about that. The very capacity to love is actually evidence of God's gift to us. So love itself is a response to God's existence and to God's gifts in creation. Would you agree? Does that make sense? You know, the old gospel hymn says, "Oh, how I love Jesus because He first loved me." So love, our love for God is always a response to God's love toward us. And to connect it back to the creation story, I've always thought that one of the most beautiful questions in Scripture is where Adam and Eve have messed up, whatever that looks like, and they are hiding, whatever that means. And what does God say? In the King James Version, I love it particularly. Anyone remember? "Where art thou, Adam?" And the "thou" language is a even in the King James, it is language of the beloved. This is not formal language. We think of "thou" as formal, but actually it is not. It is actually a rather intimate usage. "Where art thou, Adam?" So God pursues us before we ever can have a sense that God should be pursued. We're going to sit with that for a minute. That's such a lovely thought, I think. Yeah. Okay. What about new creation? So let's go to Revelation.
Okay.
So like I said, this is a survey. All right? We are skimming the treetops. And the one who was seated on the throne said, "See, I am making all things new." Also he said, "Write this, for these words are trustworthy and true." Then he said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water as a gift from the springs of the water of life. Those who conquer will inherit these things, and I will be their God, and they will be my children." Isn't that just beautiful? I mean, so, I do believe the Scriptures are certainly sacred and should be looked at seriously, but also, I think sometimes we forget just the beauty of some of the things that are embedded in the Scriptures we have. I will be their God, and they will be my children. So I think the divine dream for humanity is that the children will recognize their divine parent. And so notice this is not the language of the Enlightenment. It's not a hierarchical relationship between, the 18th century Enlightenment concept of God as the divine watchmaker who set the world into motion and then let it go sort of at a distance. So it's not that sort of language. It's not the authoritarian language of a lord and servants, the royalty and the peasants, see? But notice how beautiful and specific this language is, that I will be their God and that they will be my children. Now you might say, okay, Doug, this is all very pretty. What does it have to do with worship? Well, I'll try to get there, okay? Again, I would say that, as you know, as parents and grandparents, we are always negotiating and navigating our relationship with our sons and daughters, right? Right? And that changes over time, and not only do we shape and form them, but the truth of the matter is, I think, I'm going to just say for me, that I am shaped and formed by my children and what they think. And I actually think that's the way it should be. When your kids are no longer the little ones for whom you have every moment of protection, but they become, at some point, an adult. Oh yeah, it's still my son, still my daughter. But I find that sometimes I need to stop talking and I need to listen. And that there is much to learn from my children. And so, to play with that analogy, I think that our relationship to God over and over again, God is recreating us, and this awakens us to life over and over again. So the scripture from Revelation is obviously a vision of a world yet to come, but it is also, I think, embedded in the here and now, right now. Okay, so sort of abstract, but I want you to go to the diagram with the blue circles, because here's where I try to bring these ideas together. And again, remember what I said, the question could be, does worship transform us? So in a way, I'm playing with it. Okay? All right? So I think this is what happens maybe over a lifespan of a human being who's made in the image of God. That God creates and that we respond in love, and that we are shaped and formed and transformed and reformed even on this earth as a new creation. And our understandings and our relationships to other people continue to morph, and love becomes greater and greater and greater. And then there's a response to this new reality, and it's just a continual circle of development and expanding our understanding of God in worship. So, between creation and this new creation, whenever it happens, how is this all going to unfold? So, we'll try to move from the sublime to perhaps a little bit more of the earthbound. What is worship? Let's just play. When somebody says to you, define worship, what would you say that is? Yes?
I would say singing praises to the Lord.
Singing praise to the Lord. Absolutely. Lovely.
Acknowledging who God is.
Okay. Acknowledging who God is.
Communication through prayer.
Communication through prayer. Okay. All good. Anyone else?
Usually it's communal. Doesn't have to be, but most of the time that's...
Often. Mm-hmm. Yes.
As far as formal worship, church on Sundays, things like that, Wednesday nights, it's like a refresher.
Refresher. Tell us more.
Well, adults, those who are unfortunate enough to still be working, you know, you have your work week, let's say.
Right, right.
It's easy to just focus on that, mainly.
Okay.
Maybe you pray every night, you pray through the day, that's a little break or refresher. But on Sundays, it's like a formal acknowledgement
Okay.
of what you need spiritually. It's a weekly refresher.
All right. Okay. All right. Let me play off of that, because I think you're onto something. Although I think we might make our definition just a smidge broader. So let me try this out on you. This is not the final word, but this is just one thought. Worship is when, time, we are where, in a place, someplace, that we can receive God's creation and recreation and respond by loving God with heart, soul, mind, and strength. Now, I hope it'll happen in about 42 minutes. The when, the where, and that we together receive God's creation and recreation, and we acknowledge who God is, and that we respond by loving God with heart, soul, mind, and strength, right? Right? We hope, but let's also acknowledge it can happen in other places. They're not mutually exclusive. Hopefully, it does happen during the week, the brief prayer, you know, a word of Scripture, perhaps a piece of music that you listen to that helps you to connect, to hear God's still small voice. You know, so worship is a when and a where, I think, and it's where we place ourselves in the moment to receive all that God is and all that God has done, and where we respond to that moment of acknowledgement. Okay? So maybe that's a working definition as far as it goes. So then, how are we formed or informed or transformed in worship to be, well, to reflect more closely the image of God, the fingerprints of God upon our lives? I really want you to talk to me. How are we formed? What are the things that happen that form us and shape us and transform us in worship? Give it a try.
Experiences.
Experiences, good. And you know what? That's all because we are physical beings, it has to come through an experience. That's right.
Surroundings.
So, tell us more.
Well, if you're not distracted, certain things, you have to be undistracted.
Okay.
You have to be focused.
Yeah. All right. All right.
Is being prepared part of it?
Yes, and we're going to come back to that at the end. Wonderful. Yeah. Maybe some
I was also thinking of remembrance.
remembrance. Love it. Tell us more, Aaron.
Well, you're always, depending on the season or the type of year, you're going back on the different passages and Christmas every year, so you're bringing back why we celebrate Christmas and Easter.
Yeah, it's not right, you know. So remember if you play with the word remember, it is to remember, to again put together something that might have been displaced. Does that make sense? So remembering is a great word. That's really helpful. Anything else? How are you formed or transformed in worship?
I always got the picture of the story where Moses was placed in the crack of the rock and God walked past.
Elijah?
And then, no, when God,
when
when
he
was in the
glory. Okay,
yeah,
okay.
when he
Yes,
walked
you're
past
right.
and he went back down to the people
Uh-huh.
and he glowed. And that's how I've always thought of like worship here. It's like this is the one point where we as humans can get as close as we can to God. And then as we go back out into the world, we in some way should reflect that back, and that light will push back into that darkness that we're going out into.
Lovely.
And so that's the way I've thought about it. And I don't think every time, you know, we leave church we're going to just be glowing. But I think there's going to be some essence. Yeah, no. I think there'll be some essence of that, you know, as we leave. We should have something where people would recognize something different in us. In the
Lovely.
world.
Really well said. Connie?
I think that worship is healing.
Worship is healing.
Yes.
Lovely. Beautiful. So, all of these things, I think, are our ways of receiving the creation and the recreation that God is up to in our lives. The way that God, you know, C.S. Lewis, for those of you who, anybody ever read the science fiction trilogy by Lewis? It's really fascinating. And his description of evil people, even evil people, he tends to use the word bent. It's a really interesting choice of words to me, because it implies that that which is bent could be straightened. And, you know, I remember my dad, by the way, I'm a terrible carpenter. My dad is an engineer. The house that Mom and Dad still live in 40 years later, Dad was he was his own contractor for, and I should have paid more attention, you know, but when you're 17, you know how it is, Chad, right? But both my dad and my grandfather would often take a bent nail. Have you ever seen a good carpenter do that? And kind of roll it over and tap, 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 and then be able to use that nail? I think, you know, I think God is so great that God often can even take that which is bent and use one again for God's purposes.
Read it over and over in the Bible. That's
Indeed,
sure.
indeed, indeed. Well, and then our last question, to what end are we transformed? Why does this even matter, that we might be formed or informed or transformed in worship? To what end are we transformed? What do you think? So we can be nice people?
Well, again,
Surely it's more than that.
establishing a relationship that allows us to be with God without sin interfering, so that we can communicate, you know, and be at one with God.
And one thing, what I think, it was perfect what she said about healing. In our healing, that gives us the ability to go out into this kind of, this bent, broken world and help others, you know, through that. So as we worship and become stronger, we have the ability to go out and, you know, help others with what they're going through.
Yes.
I think that we are transformed so that when we get into the world, our lives will portray that we are Christians, that we are born again, we are a new creation, and then other people can be changed through our own action in our community.
That's lovely. Lovely. So we're back to this response scripture about, you know, we're loving our neighbors as ourselves. You know, we don't see ourselves as better than. We're on pilgrimage. We're all striped, right? And if we admit it, we're all bent somewhere. Maybe all wounded somehow. And so we're in this. So loving our neighbors is part of the end to which we are transformed in worship. So, a couple of closing thoughts. Thank you for talking with me. I got a little art for you. The creation of Adam. So, you know, whatever, you know, so here's the old man in the sky, Polly. You know, Michelangelo picked up on the popular representation
Are these cherubs or
of God.
babies?
So the main thing is that the God is reaching out and so the image of God idea, you know what a mirror image is in architecture or anything else? The truth of the matter is, while this is not perfectly symmetrical, it's actually close enough that if you draw sort of an axis on the slant between their two fingers, and you sort of take the upper part of God's torso and Adam's torso, notice that the way those are sort of images of each other. Now it's not exact because an artist never will fall into just a simple pattern, right? So you have to play with this, but if you don't look at the way the legs are askew, but if you just sort of look at the bodies, they're images of one another. Isn't that interesting? I don't know how much of that was intuitive and how much of that intentional. So here's a little picture of the image of God in humanity. And just for grins, this is for fun, have you ever noticed this? Ever made the connection between this and the famous Spielberg movie, E.T.? Have you ever made the connection between the hands? Again, I do not know if Spielberg, if this was intentional or intuitive, but it really doesn't matter. I think the picture that Michelangelo is a strong enough that the divine is shaping the earthen bound, that there's something about this that we just resonate. That's just for fun. I don't know that that means anything except that I wanted to make sure you knew that. You know? I've never read in an interview with Spielberg whether he really meant to copy that from the Sistine Chapel, but I would make the case that it is. I've got just a few minutes and I've got to dash to a rehearsal, and there are a few singers who hopefully will follow me. Let's look at our last page and think about a pattern and a question, and actually Susan made reference to this a minute ago. So, worship that forms and transforms us, I would offer to you as some things to be aware of. First of all, to consider a pattern that might enrich your worship. And I would say the pattern is this: preparation, attention, and reflection. So it's sort of a threefold pattern. And let's take Sunday morning worship as an example. I would encourage you to fully embrace and engage our experience together. That maybe on Saturday night before you go to bed, or maybe Sunday morning you're up and you're brushing your teeth, you might just utter a small prayer for yourself and for our community. And it might be as simple as, Lord, help us worship well today. In other words, just a moment of preparation, that the people of God might hear the still small voice of God. And that your ministers, no matter how much they want us to worship well, this is something that worship is the work of the people. This is something that we're all in together. Susan?
Well, I really like the fact that when we do our rehearsal on Sunday mornings, before we leave the choral hall, you always do a prayer for worship. And that preparation is really meaningful to me.
Thank you. Thank you. Then, you know, honestly, we must bring our attention to this moment. Whether it's Sunday morning, whether it's a moment during the week, maybe a chapel service, you have an opportunity to go to a prayer service on Wednesday. Our attention is critical. And then I would say it's not over. I would offer to you that you may yet still reflect on what happened. You might give thanks to God for something that day. I would say that this is a threefold pattern worthy of experimenting with for yourself, and see if this helps you to engage in worship more fully. Preparation, attention, and reflection. And then I want to ask you one last question that I think is an interesting question for us all. How may I worship better in this season of life? Because underneath that question is my own sense that we worship differently according to the season of life we're in. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with what you learned as a child. In some ways, maybe we can and should go home again, but anyway, how about you? How might you worship better in this season of life you're in right now? Thoughts? Yes, Ann?
Well, given the age range of this class, most of us may be retired, so we have more time to worship in our own space, at home, or in preparation.
Great, great. Someone else?
Well, kind of along the same lines, deeper study, Bible study, which to me makes worship more meaningful.
Okay.
The more you know,
Okay.
the better prepared you are.
Someone else? How might you worship better in this season of life? Another way, how might you worship better knowing what you know now? Yes?
Experience.
Okay,
Life experiences have certainly given me a different slant on worship.
Lovely. Of course, and of course they have. Of course they have. Another thought before I...
Yeah, I would say
Yes.
loving your neighbor as yourself.
Okay. Lovely. Yep. Always remembering what we already know.
I think attention is important. I mean, some of us end up thinking about what we're going to have for lunch. It's a discipline to be in church and pay attention.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me offer two quick things, and then I'm going to scoot. One is, in spite of what Thomas Wolfe said about you can't go home again, I think occasionally it's worth remembering something from a childhood spiritual experience and why that may have had value in that moment. I think our childhood spiritual experiences may be tempered by time, but it doesn't mean they had no value at all. So sometimes I would encourage you to sort of spiritually go home again. And you might ask yourself the question, as Charles Wesley did at his conversion, you know, why was my heart strangely warmed in that moment back there? And I think that's okay. And at the very same time, I would say, be open to something new. Be open to the Spirit who may speak in new ways. And that may be as silly and practical as that, why in the world does that minister of music choose a hymn? I did not know. Well, actually, just to defend myself briefly, there's this thing called a worship planning team, and it's not like I'm the only person at the table. Actually, can you cut off the camera, David? No, he's not going to. Sometimes I'm saying, I don't think our people know that. So, you know, I may be the voice who's actually the little more reticent voice, but I also think that there are new texts, there are new tunes, there are new expressions in worship that will help us to hear the still small voice of God, in hopes that we will reflect the image of God. And as Cecil Sherman used to say at the end of every sermon, I know that because I worked with him for a year in Charlotte when he was the interim preaching minister, and that's what I came to tell you today. So I got to run. All right, bye guys. My pleasure, my pleasure.